Today we're going to be doing a training session that is not related to calculation like our last video. This time we're going to be doing positional evaluation. So you might be wondering, what does it mean to evaluate a position? So evaluating a position is an activity that you do during the game in which you look at a position and you weigh the factors in the position, which is part of getting to know the position so that you can then decide on what the best move would be in that position. So we'll start with a basic one, and one which is somewhat common, starting with this opening called the England Gambit. And England Gambit has a very poor reputation. However, I find that most people don't know why it should be so poor. And what they're worried about is what happens in this line. After knight c6, the pawn on e5 is hanging. So this part, I'm just going to explain what's happening. We're not evaluating the position yet. And if you try to hold on to the pawn, they just keep hammering it with queen e7. So this is one of the main lines in the England Gambit. And here people frequently give back the pawn. However, I find this is not necessary. So let's evaluate the position. For example, after bishop f4. So we're not going to wonder what white's going to play. I'm telling you, white's playing bishop f4, and we're going to evaluate this position. So a little bit more about evaluation. Evaluation means weighing factors. So that means there are some factors you need to think about in any position. And I think there are three main factors. Other coaches like Jeremy Silman, they have suggested their own way of balancing the position. But I think we should keep it as simple as humanly possible. For example, imagine if you have like 8 things that you think are important in your life and you want to somehow address all of those important things every day. It's going to be really hard to balance all of those factors at once. It's the same in a chess position. If there are maybe 8 things that are important, then it's going to be hard to decide which is more important in one position. So I've broken it down like this. There are just 3 things. One of them is king safety. This is obvious because the objective in chess is to give a checkmate, and so you don't want your king to get checkmated. And if your opponent's king is easy to attack, that means that should be advantageous for your side. But obviously it's not the only factor. One factor which is very obvious, especially to beginning players, is material, because they like to count the pieces. Probably if you've ever been to a chess club, you've seen some kid lining up the chess pieces on the side like this, and they're like counting them over and over again. Not how many points they're worth. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many pieces they have. So that's like the most naive example of material counting and perceiving the worth of material. But many people, they're kind of like that on some level. Either consciously or subconsciously, they are counting the material all the time, and they frequently prize it above all else, even though you don't win a chess game based on your score. And the third factor would be the activity of your pieces. This is probably the least obvious, because I think many people sort of equate the existence of their pieces with the activity of those pieces. But this is not the case. Just because pieces are on the board doesn't mean they are making themselves useful. So that's the last factor. So you can see this as like the holy trinity of the chess position. How safe is your king? How safe is their king? What material do we have? What material do they have? And how active are those pieces for both sides? So those are the factors. So we have to weigh and balance them. We have to decide who is better based on all 3 of them, not just one. But we have to start by considering them one by one. And note the comparative aspect of this. We are not just thinking about our material. We're not counting like all of our pieces. We're not saying, okay, I have 8 pawns, and then moving on with our lives. We're also considering the fact that black has only 7 pawns, and that's just for material, right? So if we count the material in this position, we will see that white is ahead by 1 pawn. Notice that I'm not giving a number. I'm not saying white is +1. I'm not saying some engine evaluation. It's just a fact. White is up a pawn. That's the material balance. If the material balance was like even on points, I would describe what's different in the position. I would say maybe white has a pair of bishops, although this position is not like that. Whenever there's something different, about the pieces, that is something you need to observe when you look at the material, not just how much there is or what its worth might be in some kind of arbitrary numerical system. We also need to think just what is the balance of pieces. All right, welcome Nerf Russians. I was just explaining my simple method for evaluating a chess position. And we just talked about material. So in this position, white is up a pawn. So the next important thing is king safety. In positions like this where not a lot has changed, it's a little bit hard to gauge king safety. So we would probably say that they're close to equal. Although it's worth considering how there are multiple angles of attack on the kings. Like black's king might get attacked from the front, or white's king might get attacked on this diagonal. So we might say that neither king is safe because they have not castled yet. They have not secured their king position. And the last thing is the activity of the pieces. And I think this is the most important in this position. It's not the fact that white's up a pawn. It's that white has very active pieces. This configuration in practice has been shown to not be very active generally because the bishop is stunted by the queen. It can't go further than that. And the queen could become easy to attack. One famous game where a queen came out by this stage of the game is Morphy versus McConnell. I think the game was in like 1853 or something. I never quite get it right. But in that game, the queen got attacked like 20 times, and then the king got attacked like 10 times, and then it was checkmate. So usually moving the queen this early results in poor piece coordination, which means more activity for the other side. The most superficial way to figure out who has more active pieces is to see how many of them are out. Now this is black to play, so obviously black could improve one of their pieces. But it looks like white's pieces are attaining more reasonable posts. So if anyone who's watching wants to volunteer maybe a move for black to try to change the situation, or just whatever you guys think is the most critical test for black, feel free to let me know. But based on these three things, we could say that the material is better for white, more is generally better. We would say that the activity is slightly better for white because their pieces are better coordinated. And we would say the king safety is roughly equal. So it seems like white is at least slightly better. So what should black do? Is there anything good to do, or is it just that white is clearly better? All right, so we have a suggestion of queen b4. So this might come as a shock after all this talking about the evaluation of the position, how white's better, that now there's a double attack. But it's not wrong. See, I think good calculation starts from a good evaluation of the position. White is better. So even though queen b4 is there, it's logical that there should be some way out, some way that white is enduring. It doesn't mean it's always true. Sometimes for concrete reasons, the evaluation is not what we think it is, and we will see that later on in more examples. But here, how can white mitigate this problem? Their bishop's hanging, their king's hanging. How do we fix that problem? Any suggestions? All right, so Nerf Russians is suggesting bishop d2 or queen d2. Which one do you think is better, incidentally? We'll just look at that one first, whichever one you like. All right, so bishop d2 makes sense. So bishop d2 is also what I prefer. I've actually barely looked at queen d2. I think the problem would not be that the bishop's hanging, but that b2 is hanging. So this is, maybe I should have drawn 3 arrows. This is a very active move from black. However, that doesn't mean that black's position is overall active. They're using the same piece again and again. So bishop d2, white is also maybe forced to do this, but the queen has to move again. And so the logic behind queen b4 is not that we should retreat. We shouldn't play like queen b6 or something. It's queen takes b2. Yeah, so Nerf Russians loves to offer a queen trade, so it took a lot of self-restraint for him to suggest bishop d2. So after queen b2, what should white do? The position's still very concrete. So let's see if maybe this is an exception where white is better on all the counts, but black is a concrete tactic. Is black going to win the rook on a1, or is there a way to escape? All right, so Nerf Russian says white has to play bishop c3. I actually disagree, and if anyone would like to suggest a good move for black after bishop c3, I think it'll be very interesting for everyone. I've won many games from this position as black, and I've never played it as white. Actually, no, I played it once as white just to mess with one of my students. They thought they were going to catch me in something, and so I wanted to test their knowledge. But of course, that's not a serious game. So in a serious game, I've won many games after bishop b4. So now black is suddenly active because they fixed their problem. Yeah, so Nerf Russian sees it now. So after bishop b4, this is practically game over. I can't tell you how many times I've checkmated someone after they played queen d2. Bishop takes c3, and they think queen c3 guarding the rook, but they're not looking for queen c1 checkmate. The queen moves so many times in a row, and then it's checkmate. Actually, I played a game just like this once when I went to Rutgers Chess Club after a long time. I founded Rutgers Chess Club, and after a long hiatus, I went, and since it was all new members, they didn't know who I was, so I pretended that I didn't know how to play chess, and I beat someone like this, making beginner moves. So let's go back and see what went wrong. So bishop c3 doesn't work for tactical reasons, but that doesn't mean that white is worse. In fact, if we evaluate this position maybe again, we can see that white is still extremely active. Their only problem is that the rook is hanging. So if they fix the problem that the rook is hanging, they are otherwise just better in practically every way. So this suggests a really rather obvious move, knight c3. Strider28, welcome. Good to see you after a long time. I feel like I haven't seen you on stream in a couple of months at least. So after knight c3, this position is just great. All right, so Nerf Russians is suggesting bishop b4. However, I have some misgivings. For example, let's say we play rook b1. Actually, you know what, Strider? I have not seen your stream. Maybe I should check it out. If you want to post a link or something in the chat, feel free so people can check it out. So after rook b1, right? They have to play queen a3. It looks like they're just getting like completely bullied here because white has activated all these pieces, almost every minor piece plus a rook active, and they're not even down a pawn. So I would evaluate this position as great for white. And that's also how the engine evaluates this position. This position is almost like +5 or something, maybe even better if you are going by the engine evaluation points. So let's go back and just process this a little bit more. So in this position, right, we were looking at this position and saying white is better because they have better piece activity and greater material. And even though black had a concrete way to try to shake up the position, as long as white didn't fall into this trap with bishop c3, bishop b4, they end up with a spectacular position. So the initial evaluation can actually tell you what you should be calculating, which is part of why I've moved on to this evaluation portion after last week's calculation exercise. So if anyone has questions about this one, we can talk about it. Otherwise, we can move to the next one. Sometimes concrete factors trump the positional evaluation, but usually in the process of evaluating a position, you will discover these factors, these threats like queen b4. And then the task becomes not evaluating the first position, but evaluating what happens after a forced line. Okay, so